Your flight gets cancelled. The AI doesn't send you a sympathy emoji and a FAQ link. It can help you rebook it. It checks seat availability. It verifies your loyalty tier. It confirms your luggage transfer. And if the airline owes you compensation, it sends the money. No forms, no escalation, no please stay on the line. That's not a chatbot. That's a specialized language model doing one job extremely well. And for enterprises, that difference changes everything. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Analytics Insight podcast, where we talk about the ever evolving tech space. And I'm your host, Priya Dialani. By 2027, more than 50% of generative AI models used by enterprises will be domain specific. From automating routine tasks to uncovering complex insights, enterprises are racing to integrate AI into their operations. The market is flooded with general purpose AI models and LLMs that promise to be one size fits all solution. But business users requiring tangible results face the dilemma of choosing between a generic tool and a specialized solution. Now, today, this answer will be given by Ranga Kanapathy, Global CTO and Head of Engineering and Technology at Altimetrik. Hi, Ranga, how are you doing?
Great. Thank you, Mbalika. Great to have a conversation with you specific to this topic, which is the heart of the press. Yeah.
Definitely. And, before we get into our core discussion, let's set our foundation of today's episode by telling our listeners more about the company, its specialization, and alongside that, we would also like to know more about you, Ranga, your journey. How has your journey been till date? And what exactly is your role at Altimetric today?
Good. Thank you. First of all, good afternoon to all, and great to be here and glad to be having this conversation given the current situation. So, by the way, I'm Ranga Kanapathy. Been with Altimetrik for over 8 years. From the beginning, been heading the whole engineering and technology, and the whole idea of having this organization initiated for solving the digital solutions for enabling the business from the beginning. This company was started in 2012. That was the aim of starting it. And fast forward, we are dealing with over 150 customers across the globe, across several domains. It could be fintech and payment tech and banking, manufacturing, life sciences, which is pharma, and now insurance and automobile. So with that, we are doing really well. We have a global presence in over 20 odd countries with a total engineering force of 11,000 plus. And recently we acquired a company called SLK, and that is bringing a lot of different value from the intelligence ops and DigiOps. We were predominantly product engineering organization, helping our customers to enable digital platforms and data platforms and solving their business problems. So that is Altimetrik, and we've been growing really well, and we have our own space in this industry, and customer likes us, and the continuity of the customers is very critical. And we have almost over 90% of the customer retained in a continuous fashion. So these are some of the high level aspect of it. When we deal with at least the top five banks in the world, if you pick, we are working with them. Similarly, payment tech and fintech, we are working with them. We take the top 10 pharmaceutical companies, we are dealing with them in several models, from AI to data to platform building for them. And similarly with automobile and the supply chain as well. So very happy to be part of this organization. And it's a very young and energetic organization spread across all the continents in the world. And coming back to me, so like I said, been with the organization, this organization for the last 8 years. Prior to this, I was with bigger organizations like PayPal, Visa, Mattel, and Fisher Price. I lived in the US over a decade. So that really gives a different perspective of how business is run, how technology evolves. And predominantly, I was in the Valley. So that gives a little more edge in understanding the technology evolution, which is helping different businesses in that space. So that came to India predominantly to set up an offshore development center for PayPal in Chennai. And I was part of the core exec team to setting it up from zero to 1,500 to 2,000 people. We set it up in Chennai. That time it was eBay and PayPal together. And that was a partnership model we had in Chennai. Then we evolved it to Bangalore, and that was one of a very, very interesting experience that I had in my lifetime. Over 10 years, I worked with both eBay and PayPal, and part of their complete journey from just being a platform to P2P to B2B, all the way up to B2C, and all kinds of models, and been in every aspect of the business from financial services and marketing and risk operations, fraud management, and pretty much global operations, pretty much everything. And that gave a very depth understanding of how a startup can evolve into proper corporate. And I was party and part of the entire growth journey of both organizations. Prior to that, I was with Visa back in US in the headquarters, managing the data platforms, mostly for the corporate side of it, and where the data was primarily and linear large organization data is the currency and the fuel. And Visa has the largest, I would say, reasonable real-time data, which is used for various analytics and insights perspective. That gave me a larger and a deeper understanding of how data can play a huge role in enabling business and the customers and also the markets. So that is my general stake. And of course, I worked in other startups back in the US. And also after PayPal here, I was again gone back to Visa in Bangalore as part of the leadership team up in Bangalore, setting up the whole data platform, where I was again managing the global data platform for Visa. This was both for international and global, and also the UK, Europe. So that was a very different perspective of managing the whole global data platform for Visa as an entity together. It was a two different organization for some time, Visa Inc. and Visa Europe. Then the integrated organization, I was running the global platforms for them, which is a very unique and very different experience, a very useful experience also. This happened during the Brexit, a lot of complications, complaints, and regulatory issues. We have to integrate the data platform and application. That was one heck of a good experience, I would say. And after that, I'm with Altimetrik for last 8.5 years. So being in this industry for over 30 years, mostly in data. And we've seen the complete evolution of how data used to be versus where it is now. So very happy to see how things have evolved. The whole generative AI is kind of completely taking control. And nice to see how the industry is budging toward, market is budging toward. And even we could see all the customers are reacting to it in a very, very nice manner. So that's something about me.
That's a great overview, Ranga, and really helps set the context for everything you're building. Particularly like how you highlighted the organization's focus on the current AI era and, of course, the role you're playing in driving that forward.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, when we talk about general purpose models, now these models are built on massive, broad data sets, are very impressive in their ability to handle a wide range of tasks. They can summarize text, write code, and answer questions on virtually any topic. However, they do have shortcomings when applied to some specific high stakes workflows of an enterprise. And these models are built for breadth rather than depth. And they have their own limitations as well. So, why do you think that today domain specific language models are like an make or break moment for enterprise AI?
Absolutely. I think currently most of the LLMs that is broadly built on the public domain, which is generally available information, which is public for anybody who can build any models on top of it. But the aspect is that cannot help the specifics of the business. I will just take an example of a payment tech industry, right? Payment is just paying from one party to another party, a P2P, or it could be B2C or B2B, whatever be the case. There's one party sending the money, other party receiving the money. A lot goes through between this process, right? There should be validation of the persona who is sending the money, and the fraud management, risk management, the reconciliation, compliance, and all the guardrails around the whole payment tech industry itself has to be managed well before it reaches the money to the end user, right? So, but This is a one-liner. So in any general LLM, it cannot capture all the aspects of payment from end to end. So for most of the organization, if you take financial, the risk is a very, very key aspect. So risk cannot be a general LLM, and risk is very specific to specific industry and specific geographical location itself. Like if you take, for example, I'm just taking PayPal as an example. PayPal in US is different, and within US, California it is different. Maybe it's New York, it is different, and Texas it is different. To get out of US, if you go to Europe, every country in Europe has a different models and compliance and regulatory. So the risk model has to align to those compliances or regulatory and the GDPR and other regulatory aspects of those particular geography or countries. So that what it means is a general LLM for a payment industry cannot be used as a model across the organizations. So there has to be, for if you take the domain specific LLMs, which is predominantly risk could be a domain itself. So risk can have multiple sub functions within that before a payment goes from one party to another party. And similarly, fraud is also very similar. And if you take reconciliation in the entire process of financial services, reconciliation is another language model has to be created so that it becomes specific to the business what each organization is doing, containing or taking considering the factor of the regulatory and the compliance aspect of it. So that is very, very critical. So even though AI can give the models in a very broader sense, which is very easy and seems to be exciting, but the nuances about specific language model, specific domain model, and specific to an extent subdomain models. So when it says subdomain models, fintech and payment tech, risk and the compliance, these are the ways that things can go deeper, and everything contributes to make a payment successful, making a payment legal, making a payment authoritative, and complaining to the regulatory board. So that is where the DSLM or SLMs are very, very specific and very important. And that is where all these organizations, mostly in the regulated industries like fintech or even pharmaceutical industry, are taking that very, very seriously. Otherwise, it becomes a generic model. It can actually throw a lot of hallucination. That is some of the challenges that we are seeing as we're evolving this whole LLMs. And the more so over, we see the SLMs and the DLMs are taking larger focus in any particular business models. Otherwise, it could actually force a lot of risk. Their models can force some of serious risks to even bring down the business itself. So that is where the DSLM or SLMs are very, very specific, very important. And once you get that stronger, you can actually combine multiple DLMs or DSLMs or SLMs together to become a common LLMs. Like, for example, if you take the compliance, regulatory, recon, settlement, and payment tech, and within that, GDPR, if you put all of this together, it becomes a common LLMs for most of the industry. All it would need is some bit of a customization for a specific state, a specific country, a specific geo. I think that is how I would foresee, and not just me, the whole industry is foreseeing that, because the top layer is the data, which is 25%, which is very critical and important. But creating the whole model all the way from the multi-model and building the right models using through the DLMs or SLMs or domain-specific LMs is very, very important. Otherwise, it becomes very generic. It is almost like a Wikipedia. So that's how I would say.
That's a really compelling perspective. Thank you for sharing that, Ranga. And it highlights something a lot of enterprises are only just beginning to realize. Because for years, the focus was on scaling AI horizontally, building larger, more generalized models that could do a bit of everything. But now we are seeing it's a clear shift towards depth over breadth. And I think domain specific language models aren't just a technical evolution. They definitely represent a strategic pivot in how organizations think about AI value.
Yeah, I would say more specific to the industry. Every industry needs to have sub DLMs, which would form as a generic LLMs for industry. That takes like it matures. The maturity level to get to a specific LLM, it has to be the more stronger in the DLMs. I think that is where it is, and you're right, absolutely.
Right, right. And I think when we talk about AI, it has created opportunities to progress on real world problems concerning health, education, and even the environment. However, when we talk about AI, there are four types of AI: reactive machines, limited memory machines, theory of mind machines, and self aware machines. Now, that's what leaders say, that only the first two types of AI currently exist, while the last two are purely theoretical. So, is it true? I mean, why should we know about these four levels of AI sophistication, and why most companies are stuck at level two?
I think you made it point very clearly that the AI sophistication. Let me just put it from my perspective based on our understanding of what industry is evolving. See, the way I would put it is the prompt engineering, which is very commonly used, where we feel it's very easier and responsive and reactive, and people use a lot at all levels, right? It doesn't have to be in the specific understanding of AI itself. ChatGPT just go through some questions, it gives you some answers, and you keep pruning the questions, you get a right, better, closer answers. Then comes this whole RAG model, so the retrieval-augmented generation, which is very important. So it is predominantly, it uses a lot of samples and the old patterns and the real data, which actually gives you some bit of closeness to the reality, which is where the RAG is very, very critical. Then once you have that, the third aspect is the fine tuning. So that is very critical. Once you have the historical information, the predictive modeling, the fine tuning to your needs, your specific business needs or functional needs or customer needs or market needs, that has to be managed by the specific SMEs, the subject matter SMEs or the domain specialists, right? That is where it is. The fourth one is building your own LLMs, which is very expensive. That is where people are stuck now. To an extent, the first two is pretty easier. A third requires the knowledge and experience which is there in the industry. The fourth one is building your own LLMs. That is a very costly affair. Like we just discussed with the previous question, it cannot be very generic. It has to be specific to the industry, specific to the needs of the end customers or the end users in any specific industry. That has to go through complete end-to-end. You take an example of like a pharma industry. There is a drug discovery process. It takes a completely into process. It takes almost 2 to 3 years to completely finish a pharmaceutical discovery and take it to the market, which means for every aspect of the cycle of creating a medicine requires a lot of knowledge and functional inputs required from the specialist, and that has to be validated, verified in through the SLMs, and eventually get into SLMs for that particular organization. That requires a hell of a lot of investment, time consumption. When I say investment, it is a knowledge investment and the domain investment, model investment. Fourth is very critical, the infrastructure investment. For the larger part, infrastructure is very, very critical, and that predominantly takes over 50% of the cost of bringing and building your own LLMs, which is very critical for any enterprises. That is why the first two becomes much kind of usable, which can be generic and which doesn't impact any business in a very deep manner, like a regulated industries or any sensitive industries. The fine tuning and building a own model is very, very critical in the sophistication from the AI perspective. These four levels of AI sophistication. That's how I would phrase it. This is predominantly based on we are working with different customers across the board. And this is what we see from how things are evolving as is AI sophistication.
That really puts things into a perspective. And what stands out to me is how the journey of AI isn't just about adopting advanced algorithms, it's about evolving organizational maturity alongside it. If we break it down, most companies have clearly moved beyond basic automation, but they're still operating in the comfort zone of predictive insights, where AI tells you what might happen but not necessarily what to do next. And that's where the real bottleneck lies.
You're right. Yeah.
Great. I think when we talk about domain-specific models, they really make a real difference, because these smaller focused models are trained on industry vocabulary and organizational data, which means they can deliver more precise answers, run more efficiently, and operate more securely. And I think that's becoming the next big AI investment priority. Altimetrics also has this platform, Domain Forge, that supports this transition by helping companies build and deploy their own domain trained models in a secure and scalable way. Can you give more insights about this platform, about Altimetric's Domain Forge?
Absolutely. I think you said it right. The current challenge with most of the customers is investing. Where do they even start, right? They have the data, they have the workflows, they have the business, they have the customers, they have the end users. Everything is up in there. When they want to get into AI, where would they even start? Will they start at the topmost layer, which is the application layer, or start from the infrastructure layer? So that is where the application layer, which is the experience layer, I would say, which is kind of they're playing with it as an existing platform or application, making it as a black box. They play with the experience layer, which is, I would say, generally easier, giving a different experience for the customer, using the data, playing around with analytics, insights, and predictive modeling, and simple modeling that will make customer really exciting to keep the stickiness. But the aspect is, if they want to create some new models within the system, that is a little expensive, and also it requires a bit of understanding of implementing the right models using the right tools. So which is where some of the customers are a bit struggling, because they have too much thing in the industry. They have, you just say Anthropic, and you have Gemini, you have ChatGPT, you have OpenAI, pretty much. And every day the new tools are evolving, new models, structures are evolving. And for them to make good use of that, how do they actually put a plan in place? So the way what we do it is, we try to understand what is the problem they're trying to solve. Is it like a productivity or efficiency, or bringing in a business value to their existing system, or bringing in different value to the customers, or bringing in value to their own agents? Like, for example, the banks have all the customer representatives who are acting as agents for bringing in investment or solving the wealth management, blah, blah, blah. So they need to have the right tools to make a decision. So while that is the problem everybody's trying to solve, it is going to be like, we cannot solve the world hunger problem in one go. So we try to understand what they're looking for. So this whole platform, the Domain Forge, what we have is kind of an orchestration layer which can connect to their existing models. If they don't have the models, we can build the models like the submodels. If they have the data well organized, it is much easier, where we can build models on the data and use this whole orchestration platform without impacting the current BAU, which is business operating, business as usual, which means the customers will not see any kind of a glitch in terms of running the business or seeing the business. And the agents also will not see any kind of a difference. Domain Forge can give an experience for them to play and use their use cases in our platform into their enterprise data. And we will use some of the base model which we can help them to create, or we created for them with their enterprise data. And through this orchestration layer, it technically becomes an SLMs, and that could be actually used and put in the production and see it as the white label in a vertical model. We will not use the end-to-end horizontal model. We'll take a slice of the vertical, apply end-to-end aspect of it, from data application tooling, building the models on their own infrastructure, and giving them to see how it is working with some of the customers. It could be like friends and families where they can try out, or some white label customers we can try out. Once they feel it is comfortable, it is safe and secure, and they see the benefit, and they see it is not breaking down any of their existing models or the business, then we replicate it. That's where the Domain Forge comes in. It acts as a very good incremental enterprise orchestration model to implement their business models using, could be SLMs, or sometimes could be DSLMs. That's how we kind of evolve. So that was exact concept. We don't want to boil the ocean. Let's pick a specific sub sliver of the vertical, use their own data, use their own enterprise environment, and build the whole models around it. That is where the Domain Forge brings in a very good orchestration layer. And we are seeing a good traction. We've tried it for at least 4 or 5 customers so far. It's actually multi-domain. We tried it with healthcare, we tried it with automobile, we tried it with fintech, and also with pharma. It's really working out well, and customers are really seeing a good benefit out of it, where they don't have to look for a bigger investment to start with. They try this out. If it works out well, it's almost like an MVP for AI. So they try it out. They see one workflow completely working with some of the models, and they see the benefit, end user benefit. Then they replicate and scale. That's where the Domain Forge comes in, and we are investing a lot more on that, where you can play with building multiple models and give us a value-add services for the customers. Instead of they building it, it could be a reusable model that we are using it specific to industries, or it could be subdomains also. So you can go to that extent. And we have built over 150 use cases in this, which is really acting as a base model for a lot of enterprises where they can perform multiple use cases for end customers or within their platform, predictive modeling, even for the environment itself, which is a model, it's an evolving thing. It's not done yet. It's an evolving thing. And we are seeing some really good benefit in some of the industries. And we're also learning, which is this particular time of the world, nothing is done and dusted. It's a continuous model, and we're evolving and maturing it. But the good thing is we are seeing a very good response from the customers where they're seeing benefit from this for their business.
Great, Ranga, and I think I completely agree with you that today it is more about continuously evolving yourself because the era is such that it demands continuous evolution. Nevertheless, I think, when we talk about the challenges certain organizations face, it's not the lack of technology, but the lack of contextual intelligence, understanding how to apply that technology effectively within specific industry environments. And that's where something like Domain Forge becomes incredibly relevant.
Absolutely.
Great. So when we talk about these domain specific models, I think there are different approaches as to how you're creating that. You either train one from scratch or you start from a pre-trained foundation model and adapt it to your domain. The first is rarely practical. Teams almost always fine tune an existing model because most of the linguistic and reasoning capability needed for domain work already exists in foundation models. And training from scratch requires large scale data that reflects both general and domain specific language along with significant compute. So I believe when we are building these domain specific models, it's very complex and powerful. What architectural shifts you think enterprises should have to support them?
See, there are two ways, right? See, AI is very exciting. It's like a shiny object. It's like a toy for the kids as of now. But it could be very scary also if you don't properly use it, right? Especially in the regulated industries, any industry for that matter. You cannot give hallucination to the customers, every business is built on trust and confidence. Once you lose the trust, then the confidence moves on, then they look for other options and you are out of the market. So there are ways to manage this whole AI modeling or the whole subdomain models. But the primary difference, what I see is the green field is managed differently and brown field is managed differently, right? When I say brown field, which is like the business is already running. If you take any banks, like if you take example of Citibank or Bank of New York or US banks, right? They've been in the industry for over like what, 5, 6, 7 decades. And they have built certain things, they evolved certain things. The regulatory models and the compliance for each country is different. The consumer base is different. And it was evolved over a period of time. You cannot say, I'm going to bring in some new models or create a models completely new and differently, which is going to change their whole behavior. And infusing AI into the mix is going to change the models, or the whole business is going to be different. So, but somebody is trying that. So most of the some of the customers are trying because it's the peer pressure. So the brown field is mostly driven from the peer pressure. That's where I was talking about. They start from the top end of the layer, which is the experience layer, then it's the application layer, then the data layer, then the tooling layer, then the model layer, then infrastructure layer. This is how the whole model works, right? So the brown field, they start with the topmost layer, the experience layer, application, and the data. If you take the green field, which is like a bottom up, I can start. It's a fresh plate for me. So I will start with the best architecture, best infrastructure, and every model is new. I don't even have to train. It's a new model. I can just use a replicated or like a peer model and use it as a base model and build on top of it, which becomes much easier. But the challenge is like the multinational banks, they are in like 200, 300 countries. They cannot just like them go change anything into the existing models, which can bring down some of the functions or features or even the business itself in some cases, right? So that's how the way we have to think is the cost impact is very critical. The affordability, can the organization build infrastructure from bottom up, which is almost like in any case 40 to 45% of cost is all infrastructure. Like if you have to, when I say infrastructure, it needs size, scale, and compute power. For that, most of the organization cannot afford to manage the costs. If like in a $1 billion technology budget, assuming 500 million just goes for infrastructure, Where will they go build the models? Model will take another 20-30%. Then 15% to 20% will be on tooling. The application requires similar costs, another 15-20%. Then the data is on top of it, right? So with this kind of a model, this is where we have to think what is required. That is where we bring in different value, right? Because we are dealing with multi domain models across the industries, the multi verticals and multi geography. So we could see how things are evolving in certain verticals or domain and geography, and we start whether it's going to be like a simple e-commerce solution or a banking solution or a P2P solution. Depending on that, the whole infrastructure whole the landscape or the architecture would vary. So it is going to be like a startup, the model is different. If it is going to be a small business entity, the model is different. If it is a medium business, the model could be different. If it's a large business, the model is should be very, very different and it's incremental. So that's how we kind of think through. There is no one size fits all. That's my take on this. Again, the affordability of how much they can invest, both from investment perspective and as investment, it is the time, money, and the physical setup itself and the knowledge. All this contributes to what you wanted to build. So that is where I would say defining an architecture or technology landscape depends on like a startup, small, medium, and large. So that's how I would go for it. But again, it will be very specific to specific industry. Also, financial services, banking could be very different than pharma, be different than for automobile and manufacturing. So that's how I'll keep it. But I can get into specifics if you wanted.
Great. And so much goes into building a DHLM model, and I think it's an enterprise wide transformation. It's really important that organizations shouldn't rely on traditional and monolithic data architectures. Instead, they should move towards a more modular domain driven systems where data ownership is clearly defined and distributed closer to where it's created. So I think the shift is not just architectural, it should be operational, strategic, and even cultural. And I think that's what makes this space so exciting.
Actually, the last point is very, very critical. Cultural is very, very critical.
Yeah.
To most of these organizations, if you take automobile, people have been working in the traditional model for over 2 to 3 decades. So
Yes.
changing their mindset is very, very critical. That's where the people transformation starts first, then the business transformation, then the technology transformation, which is technology is always enabling entities. So that's how I would put it.
Definitely. And I think generic AI is proving to be costly and inefficient for enterprises. Sustainable AI adoption and meaningful ROI depend on understanding that true value comes from specialized intelligence. By leveraging domain-specific AI, companies can bypass slow and expensive pilot phases to deliver rapid, scalable business results. Thank you so much, Ranga, for your time and effort to be on a podcast today and, discussing that general purpose models make a strong starting point, but they rarely meet the quality bar for real enterprise use. Domain specific LLMs step in where those models stall, handling tasks that demand niche knowledge and precision. Of course, building one means getting the right data in place, making space for domain experts in the loop, and setting up systems that grow with each use case. Every part of the process, whether it's curation, training, evaluation, has to reflect the reality of the work the model supports. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Ranga, for your insights. It was lovely chatting with you.
Thank you, Priya. Really appreciate and glad we were able to converse on this. Appreciate it.
Likewise, Ranga. So, this is for our listeners. I hope you enjoyed today's discussion around domain specific models. What are certain things you need to keep in mind? What are the shifts that you need to be prepared to do? And of course, how does the future look like? Stay tuned for upcoming episodes, and you can view all our previous episodes on Spotify and other leading platforms. Thank you so much.